Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The husband failed, but in what way and what was it all about? In this story we will help you understand these questions. Enjoy watching. I was sitting at the bar, sipping a beer and thinking about my life and marriage to Andrea, when I saw him in the large mirror in front of me, walking toward me. He looked rather strange for these parts, a tall, thin man with sharp features, a square jaw with light stubble, and narrowed eyes, as if they'd seen too much sun. There was something familiar about his features, but I couldn't place it. He wore blue jeans, a white shirt, a brown vest, and a long coat. An old, shabby hat sat on his head, and he wore cowboy boots. I even heard the faint jingle of spurs as he walked. Who wears spurs these days? I asked myself. Overall, he looked like something out of an old western. The only thing missing was a gun belt with a revolver, though something told me he had a weapon hidden somewhere. He walked over to the bar stool next to me. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. I nodded, noticing his accent, which suggested he was likely from the South. "Please," I said. He smiled and sat down. "My name is Peace," he said, extending his hand. "Justice Peace." I shook his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Peace," I replied. He smiled and nodded. "Just call me Justice," he said. "Mr. Peace is my father." I chuckled, but then he added, "And you must be Amos Jones." How did he know this? I wondered. "Yes," I replied. "How did you know?" "You look like an Amos Jones," he said in his drawl. "I can learn a lot just by looking at a person." "Take that guy sitting in the corner," he added, nodding toward the mirror. I saw the man he was pointing at, a balding, middle-aged guy, looking around nervously as he sipped his drink. "There's a guy with the weight of the world on his shoulders," Justice said, shaking his head and clicking his tongue, a gesture that reminded me of my grandfather. "It's just a pity it's all his own doing." He looked back at me. "What are you drinking?" he asked. I shrugged. "Beer," I replied. Justice caught the bartender's attention with a nod. "I'll have a beer and get something for my friend, on me," he said, pulling out a small wad of cash. "My treat," he added with a grin, glancing my way. I thanked him and watched as he took out a pack of cigarettes. "Mind if I smoke?" he asked. I'd quit smoking a few years ago when Andrea and I got married, and by now, the smell of cigarette smoke irritated me. But I decided not to be unfriendly. I shrugged. "Go ahead." He took out a cigarette and, from a small box in his pocket, pulled out a single match, his last, it seemed. He struck it on his jeans like in the old westerns and lit his cigarette. Strangely, it didn't give off any smell. He blew out the match and placed it back in the box before offering me a cigarette. "No, thanks," I said. "I quit a few years ago." "Smart decision," he replied. "These things kill. But I think you'll like these. I twisted them myself. Took years to get the taste just right. Come on, one won't hurt." To my surprise, I suddenly felt the urge to smoke. I thought I was past that stage, but something about his offer was hard to resist. I nodded and took the cigarette. "That's it," he said, opening the matchbox again. I thought he had no matches left, but he pulled out the same match and lit my cigarette. He blew it out and placed it back in the box, and once again, it was the only match there. How does he do that? I wondered. I took a long drag and was surprised not to cough. It was unlike any cigarette I'd ever smoked, and I started to relax. Justice smiled as the bartender brought us our beers. "There's nothing better than a beer and a good cigarette with a friend to end the day, right?" he asked. I had to agree. He raised his beer, and we clinked glasses. "To friendship," I said. He nodded. "To friendship. So, what do you do, Justice?" I asked. "A little of this, a little of that," he replied. "Basically, I help those who've been wronged. Like you, for example." "What do you mean?" I asked, curious. "Well, I know you work hard and do your job well," he said. "I don't understand all the tech stuff you do, but I know you're the best at it." He was right, I thought. I'd been in IT for as long as I could remember, currently working as a technician maintaining client networks and servers and often helping users with desktop issues. The job paid well, and I prided myself on doing things right the first time. The only downside was the occasional business trip. "I also know you do honest work for fair pay." "Don't cheat and never lie," he said. I started to think this guy was some kind of private detective. "You always put your family first and think about your wife." But something's bothering you, Amos, isn't it? What's worrying you? Wait, let me guess, it's your wife, isn't it? Yes, I said, surprised. How did you know? As I mentioned, I can tell a lot just by looking at someone. How long has she been cheating on you? I shrugged. I don't know. I'd suspected it for a while, but only confirmed it yesterday when I got home. Tell me about it, he urged. I told him everything, how Andrea and I met, fell in love, and got married. She worked as a secretary at a law firm that hired our company for IT support. We met on an on-site call, dated for a while, and then married nearly 5 years ago. But over the past year, she began to change. At first, it was small things, but lately, she had turned into someone else entirely. I suspected an affair but couldn't afford a private detective to confirm it. A few days ago, I was sent to a neighboring state for work and finished a day early, so I decided to surprise Andrea with an unexpected date night. When I got home, however, a surprise was waiting for me. I pulled up to our 2-story house and saw an unfamiliar car in the driveway. Parking along the curb, I went inside and heard them in our bedroom upstairs. I felt like I'd been stabbed. When he came out and looked at me, I recognized him immediately as Roscoe Jennings, Andrea's boss at the law firm. Roscoe was a prominent lawyer and highly respected in the community, a large man, both in size and reputation. I knew that if I tried to confront him physically, I'd stand no chance. They laughed as I quietly made my way back down the stairs. A few minutes later, they came down together. Roscoe grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Pausing in the doorway, he looked back at me with a smirk. Hope you don't mind, I helped myself to a beer, he laughed before leaving. Andrea sat down on the sofa, looking at me without a trace of guilt. What are you doing home? You weren't supposed to be back until tomorrow. First of all, I live here, I said, feeling numb. I finished work early and thought I'd surprise you. It seems I'm the one who got surprised. Why, Andrea? Am I not good enough? Don't I treat you with love and respect? She laughed. Oh, Amos, it's not like that. Night with him is just good. Plus, he's rich, influential, and available, not like you, always working and running off to help clients. But he's married, I said. And he has children. She shrugged. So what? Now that you know about us, there's no need for secrecy. Here's what's going to happen. Roscoe will come here whenever he likes. Sometimes he'll stay over, sometimes he won't, and maybe he'll even bring friends. This won't change anything between us. You're still my husband, and I expect you to fulfill your responsibilities. But Roscoe has claimed his place in our bed. You can move into the guest room. And I expect you to treat him with respect and do as he says. I stared at her in shock. You can't be serious. This is my home. You're my wife. I won't tolerate this. She smirked. Yes, I am your wife, and this is my home too. I can invite anyone I please. You can accept it or file for divorce, but if you do, Roscoe will take care of it personally. What about his family? Don't you care about them? Roscoe and his wife have an open relationship, she said. They do as they please with whomever they choose. And you want the same for us? I asked, horrified. No, she said. I'll do as I want, with whomever I want, whenever I want. But I expect you to stay faithful to me. You're out of your mind, I replied. How long has this been going on? A few months, she said with a shrug. Roscoe has been here nearly every night you were away. I used to hide it, but now I don't see the point. What if you get pregnant? I asked, still reeling. So what? If I get pregnant, your name will be on the birth certificate. You'll be responsible. No, I said firmly. I won't touch you while you're sleeping with him or anyone else. Have there been others besides Roscoe? There have been a few, she replied indifferently. But if that's how you feel, then I suppose you'll just have to accept an intimateless marriage, because I don't intend to stop. This won't end well, I warned her. You're wrong, she said confidently. Listen, I still love you, just not as much as before. I need this. I don't know how long it'll last, but when it's over, I'll be yours again. Just let me do this. I shook my head in disbelief. You can't possibly mean that. You say you love me, yet you expect me to live this way? She grinned. Of course I love you. I just enjoy the thrill with Roscoe and his friends. That's all. So, what's next? I asked, feeling defeated. Where does this lead? Roscoe is coming over on Friday, she said. Tomorrow, actually. You'll officially hand me over to him. Of course, that means you'll have to listen to us, endure our insults, and accept your new role. My new role? I asked, horrified. What does that even mean? You'll be my willing cuckold, she said, smiling coldly. I looked at her, disgusted. You're completely crazy, I said. I grabbed her hand and removed the wedding and engagement rings, the same engagement ring that had been passed down in my family for 5 generations. It originally belonged to my great-great-great-grandmother Elizabeth, who married my grandfather Elijah several years before the Civil War. They had 2 children before he was killed by a Confederate bullet during Sherman's march to the sea. Elizabeth never remarried but made sure her children and grandchildren knew about her brave husband. His story, along with the engagement ring he gave her, had been passed down through generations. My parents still kept an old photo of Elijah and Elizabeth, taken before he went to serve in the Union Army. What are you doing? Andrea asked, startled. Those are my rings. You're wrong, I said firmly, my tone making her recoil. I had never spoken to her like that before. This engagement ring has been in my family for over 150 years, and I won't allow you to desecrate it. You can have it back if I decide you deserve to wear it again. Fine, she replied, standing up. Let it be your way. Well, are you coming to bed? Hell no, I replied. I won't touch you while you're sleeping with that piece of... Okay, she interrupted. Have it your way. But you better behave yourself on Friday. Is that a threat? I asked. Call it what you want, she said, smirking. But if you mess up, you'll pay. She went upstairs and slammed the bedroom door, locking it behind her. I slept on the sofa and got up early the next morning. When I found the bedroom door still locked, I kicked it in, breaking the door frame. It took a few hits, but I got it done. Andrea sat up in bed, surprised. What are you doing? She asked. I'm getting dressed, I said. Unlike you, I actually have to go to work. I paused my story, taking a sip of beer and a drag on my cigarette, surprised that it hadn't burned down yet. Justice sat quietly, listening. Did you talk to the lawyer today? He asked. I nodded. Yeah. Turns out Andrea was right. With the current laws, they'll wipe the floor with me. The lawyer said I'd be better off financially if I just went along with whatever she wanted. Can you believe that? Justice shook his head. So what are you going to do? He asked quietly. I don't know, Justice. I've never been in this situation before. Part of me wants to just walk away, but another part of me wants to strangle them both. Justice looked at me intently. An old friend of mine used to say that no man who does wrong can stand before a man who is right and keeps moving forward. So, Amos, what kind of man are you? I'm a man who's been wronged, I replied. He nodded. Exactly. That's why I'm here. So, what do you say to setting an ambush for them tomorrow night? You and me together. I looked at him, startled. You'd really help me? Of course, he said. You'll do most of the work, but I'll be there. So, what do you say? Ready? Hell yes, I said. For the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of confidence, all thanks to this strange man. Justice smiled, and we spent the next hour planning. By the time we were done, I felt ready to move mountains. See you tomorrow night, buddy, he said, standing up. I watched him leave and felt better than I had in months. I put on my jacket and headed home. Andrea was there when I walked in, and she didn't look happy. Where have you been? She screamed. What does it matter to you? I asked. You've been drinking, she said, walking closer. Yes. So what? At least I'm not running around with people of questionable morals. I was worried about you, she said, trying to sound sincere. I thought you might do something stupid. I know you met with a lawyer today. So you and your lover have been spying on me? What if we have? She sneered. And yes, I know you were at the bar, drinking and talking to yourself for hours. Who were you talking to, anyway? If they were really following me, they must have seen me with Justice. The bartender saw him too. He even served him a beer and took his money. I've got a lot on my mind, I said. Well, tonight's your last chance to be with me exclusively, she said. So, are you coming upstairs? No, I replied. I told you, I won't do this until you and Roscoe are done with whatever this is. Fine, she said, walking upstairs. Have it your way. To hell with it, I muttered. To hell with her and everyone she's brought into my life. I shoved my hand into my jacket pocket and found a cigarette and a match there. How did it get there? I wondered. Forget it, I thought, grabbing a beer and heading out onto the back porch. I opened the beer, put the cigarette in my mouth, and struck a match on my jeans, just like Justice had. To my surprise, the match caught fire immediately. I took a long drag, enjoying the taste and starting to relax as I sat on the swing I'd installed last summer. The next thing I noticed was Andrea standing on the porch, looking down at me. When did you start smoking again? She asked. Tonight, I said. So you'd rather sit here and smoke than come to bed with your wife? She asked angrily. I looked at her and was struck by a wave of disgust. The once beautiful face I knew so well had become something unrecognizable. I don't have a wife anymore, I said. She's dead to me. Shocked, Andrea sat down on the swing and reached out, but I pulled back, repelled by her presence. Please don't say that, Amos, she said softly. I'm still your wife. Please, come to bed with me. I shook my head. My wife would never get involved with someone like that, I said. She would have told him to get lost. But you? You let him do whatever you wanted, and now you expect me to go along with it? No, you're not my wife. You're just someone living in my house. You disgust me. Now leave before I throw up. Oh, God, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. You really hate me, don't you? Did it just now occur to you? I asked. What did you think would happen after everything you told me yesterday? What did you expect? Should I get up and dance in celebration? I'll give you one chance to stop all of this, right now. It's either me and our marriage, or Roscoe. Choose. This was the plan that Justice and I had come up with. He suggested giving her one last opportunity to end things with Roscoe, mainly for my own peace of mind. If she chose to end it, Justice said he'd help handle the details. I didn't know how he intended to help, but I trusted him. Deep down, though, we both knew she'd probably turn down the chance. For a moment, her face softened, and I saw the woman I once loved. I thought maybe she'd take this last opportunity. What do I need to do? She asked. Call Roscoe right now and end it, I said. Then quit your job. You're a good secretary, you can find work anywhere. She took out her phone and dialed his number, putting the call on speaker. Hey, baby, Roscoe said when he answered. Are we still good for tomorrow night? Andrea was silent for a few seconds, but when she looked up at me, the hardness had returned to her eyes. She grinned coldly and said, Yes, we're still on. Perfect, Roscoe replied. How's your cuckold handling all this? Not great, she said with a mocking smile, but he'll get over it. Roscoe laughed. Maybe I should bring a couple of guys along to keep him in line. Andrea chuckled. Yes, do it, she said. All right, see you tomorrow night, he replied, hanging up. She looked at me with contempt. Tomorrow's going to be a good night, she sneered. You'd better behave yourself. I nodded, knowing what lay ahead and feeling a strange calm. I had given her one final chance, and she had thrown it away. Blowing a cloud of smoke in her face, I noticed her reaction, a grimace, almost like a vampire shrinking from sunlight. So, she said, straightening herself. Do you want to spend one last night with me? This is your last chance. I shook my head. I already told you, I won't touch you while you're sleeping with that idiot. And honestly, if you were on fire, I wouldn't even bother to put it out. She shrugged. Have it your way, she said, and went back inside. I slept in the guest room with a chair propped against the door so she couldn't come in. The next morning, I got up early, got dressed, and left for work without saying a word to her. The day dragged on, but finally, it was over, and I knew what was coming that night. When I got home, I dropped my case in my home office and grabbed a beer. Andrea was cooking dinner, but I had no appetite for anything she made. You'd better eat something, she said. You'll need your strength tonight. Roscoe and the guys will be here in an hour, Andrea said. I took a beer from the fridge and glanced at what she had prepared. I'm not hungry, I replied. Besides, how can I be sure you haven't poisoned my dinner? Amos, she said, feigning hurt, do you really think I would do that? Hell yes, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket for a cigarette and a match. I'll go out on the porch to smoke, I added, heading outside. She followed. I don't like you smoking again, she said. I lit the cigarette, taking a long drag. I don't care what you like or don't like, I replied. I don't like that you're cheating on me, but I don't get a say in that, do I? She stood in silence, then shook her head and went back inside. After she left, I replayed the plan that Justice and I had developed, preparing myself for the encounter. I finished my cigarette about an hour later. Don't ask me how, but time passed strangely that night. Eventually, Andrea came back onto the porch. "Roscoe and his friends are here," she said. "Go upstairs and wait for us." I nodded and went upstairs. A chair was placed so I'd have a clear view of the bed, and I noticed a video camera set up in one corner of the room. I heard them talking downstairs, followed by footsteps on the stairs. Andrea entered first, with Roscoe close behind. The big man grinned and extended his hand, expecting me to shake it. When I didn't, he shrugged and kissed Andrea instead. "So," he said, turning to me, "are you ready for the show?" "What should I do, pretend to be happy and cheer you on?" I asked sarcastically. They laughed. "Well, if that's what you want," Andrea said mockingly. "No, I don't want this," I said. "But my wants don't matter, do they?" "I think I feel some tension," Roscoe chuckled. "Maybe I should have brought the guys in here to cool you down." "What, are you too much of a coward to handle it yourself?" I shot back. Roscoe's face flushed with anger. I took my wedding ring off and slipped it into his shirt pocket. Both he and Andrea stared at me, clearly not expecting this reaction. "You want this, Roscoe?" I asked. "You can have her. Just so you know, she's moody, and when she doesn't get her way, she turns into a nightmare. Sure, she'll act affectionate for a few years, but eventually, she'll start cheating. Enjoy her. I hope you can handle it better than I did. You came here to sleep with this, fine, go ahead. And no, I won't cry or beg. I trust you can figure it out on your own." Andrea looked shocked, clearly not expecting such a reaction. Roscoe's face darkened with rage, and he began to approach me. Suddenly, a large, dark shadow appeared in the doorway. I looked up to see Justice, his hat nearly brushing the ceiling. His eyes glowed like fiery embers against his dark silhouette. "Who the hell are you?" Roscoe demanded. "And how did you get past my guys?" "My name is Justice," he replied, his voice booming. "And I came for you." With a swift motion, Justice pulled out a lasso and threw it over the two stunned lovers. Instantly, the room vanished. I found myself blinking under a bright, clear sky in the middle of a dusty street, lined with old Western-style buildings. It took me a moment to adjust to the light. When I looked around, I realized I was dressed almost identically to Justice, with the addition of a thick poncho draped over my shoulders. I also had two Civil War revolvers holstered at my sides. The holsters were strapped to my legs, giving the whole scene a surreal but powerful authenticity. "Where are we?" I asked Justice. "In the middle of the street," he replied casually. "I can see that," I said, "but where, exactly?" He shrugged. "Is that important?" "I suppose not," I replied. He nodded toward the saloon. "They're in there, waiting for you," he said, studying me carefully. "Are you ready to do what needs to be done?" I took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." "Good," he said. "I'll be here. Stay calm and take it one step at a time." I nodded, and together we walked toward the saloon. I opened the doors and stepped inside. Roscoe and Andrea were seated at a round table against the far wall, a kerosene lamp flickering between them. 3 of Roscoe's buddies leaned against the wall, dressed in period clothing, each with a pistol at his side. I stopped a few feet from the table as Justice remained by the door, watching silently. Roscoe and Andrea were whispering, but fell silent when I entered. Roscoe grinned mockingly. "Who are you supposed to be?" "Clint Eastwood," he sneered. Andrea giggled, and his 3 henchmen smirked. Roscoe turned to his men and said, "Why don't you guys take out the trash so the lady and I can have some privacy?" The 3 moved toward me, 2 reaching for their guns. I didn't wait. I fired, the shots echoing as the 2 fell to the ground. Andrea gasped, horrified. You killed them," she stammered. "Exactly," I muttered. "And your lover's next." "No, please." Roscoe started to beg, raising his hands. "We can work this out. You don't have to kill us, Amos." Andrea's voice trembled. "Please, Amos, I'm sorry. I regret it, I do. We can make things better. You had your chance yesterday," I said, "and you chose that piece of dirt over me." "Look, Amos, it was just a game, you know," Roscoe begged. "Please don't kill me. I beg you. Are you begging? I grinned. You know, Justice, I think your friend was right when he said that no man who does wrong can resist a man who is right. I noticed a big wet spot on Roscoe's trousers and laughed. It looks like you picked a real loser, I said, turning to Andrea. Look at him. He just wet himself. Is this your idea of a man? Andrea lowered her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Listen, Amos, you can't kill me, Roscoe continued, his voice shaking with fear. I don't even have a weapon. You can't kill an unarmed person, this is simply wrong. Actually, I can, I replied. But I'll give you more chances than you were willing to give me. I took the second pistol out of the holster and placed it on the table in front of him. Come on, take it. He looked at me, then at the gun. What? He asked, standing up halfway. I said pick up a weapon, you son of a... I shouted. Did I really say that? I thought. This line from an old movie somehow seemed right. Roscoe looked at the gun, then slowly raised it. I've never killed a person before, but I just killed 4 and saw Andrea burn. I turned to Justice, who had a stern and determined look on his face. Where did they go? I asked. To a very warm place, he answered. Are they really dead? I asked him. He nodded. Yes, he said. You know, it was either them or you. You had no choice. Is this the first time you've killed a person? I nodded. Yes, I said. Have you ever killed anyone? I asked him. He looked into the distance with a sad expression on his face. More than I care to remember, he said. But, like you now, I had no choice. It was either kill or be killed. You know, if you had hesitated, they would have killed you. Deep down, I knew he was right. The worst thing you can do now is agonize over it or try to replay everything in your head. Just keep living, it will become easier over time. Trust me, he said, patting me on the shoulder. We went outside and found ourselves next to a horse tied to a post. Oh, I almost forgot, he said. I have something for you. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a small rectangular metal case, and handed it to me. I looked at the darkened case and saw the initials E.J. etched on the front. Turning it over, I saw the inscription, asterisk to my dear Elijah, may God protect you and bring you back to your one true love. Your loving wife, Elizabeth, asterisk. Where did you get this? I asked. Your grandfather Elijah gave this to me just before he died, Justice said without looking at me. How is this possible? I asked myself. Elijah Jones died during the Civil War more than 150 years ago. I looked at Justice and suddenly realized I knew who this man really was. He would be very proud if you kept this for him, Justice said, wiping a tear from his eye. I'll keep this, Grandfather, I said without thinking. Thank you for entrusting this to me. Justice turned to me with a small smile on his face. Did this happen to you and Grandmother Elizabeth? I asked. He nodded. Yes, he said. A long time ago, in a small town much like this one, some cow thieves thought they could steal my father's cattle and take my wife. I had to teach them the same lesson that you taught these guys a little earlier. This was the first time I killed a person. It took a lot of time to get over this. But Lizzie survived, we returned east, and I soon joined the army. You know the rest. And what happened then? I asked. How did you become Justice? It's a long story, mate, he said. I'll tell you about it one day, I promise. Will I see you again? I asked. He nodded. You can rest assured, son, he said. After you deal with these guys, I have no choice but to make you my deputy. Besides, you owe me a beer, he added with a smile. Yes, sir, I said, smiling. He extended his hand, and I shook it. While we shook hands, he put his other arm around me. I love you, son, he whispered, and I'm damn proud of you. I love you too, Grandpa, I said, my eyes moistening. He took a step back and climbed onto his horse. Say hello to Grandma Elizabeth for me, I told him. He looked at me and smiled. You already handed it over, he said, and she asked me to say hello to you in return. He smiled, winked, then touched the brim of his hat. See you, son, he said, provoking the horse to move forward. I watched him ride down the dusty road and disappear from sight. The next moment, I was back in my living room, dizzy from everything that had happened. I looked down at myself and saw that I was wearing my work clothes again instead of the vintage outfit I had on a few minutes ago. I felt something in my pocket and pulled it out. It was the same cigarette case that Justice, or rather my grandfather Elijah, had just given me. I opened the case and saw that one side was filled with his rolling papers, and on the other side was a photograph. I looked at the photo and saw Elijah and Elizabeth. When I carefully studied the photo, I clearly saw the similarities between Elijah and Justice. There was no doubt about who Justice really was. I turned the photo over and saw a short inscription on the back, Amos, with love, Grandfather Elijah and Grandmother Elizabeth. I put the photo back, amazed. How will I explain this to my parents? The truth was that I couldn't tell anyone about it. For starters, no one would believe me. I realized that I had not eaten for several hours and was very hungry. I walked into the kitchen, looked at the cold casserole Andrea had made, and tossed it into the trash disposal. I took out a couple of slices of cold leftover pizza and warmed them up in the microwave. After I ate, I started packing all of Andrea's things. By the time I finished, it was already late, and I felt completely exhausted. I slept restlessly. The next morning, I got up, had a cup of coffee, and went about my usual Saturday chores, including mowing the lawn. Part of me missed Andrea, but most of me was relieved that I was no longer besieged by her constant complaints and betrayals. By the end of the day, I had a plan. Naturally, I couldn't tell anyone what really happened to Andrea, so I decided to file a missing person report with the police the next day. I knew they wouldn't do anything until enough time had passed. I made a note to call a lawyer and find out how long I needed to wait to file for divorce on the grounds of desertion, knowing that no one would ever find Andrea. The next day, I went to the police station and filed a missing person report. The desk sergeant took my report, read it, then asked me to wait a moment. I sat down and waited for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, a man in a suit approached me. "Amos Jones?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm Detective Smith. Do you have a few minutes? I would like to discuss your missing person report." I followed him into a room and watched as he took out a recording device. "Mr. Jones," he said, "I noticed that your statement says your wife left with Roscoe Jennings and 3 other men on Friday night. You say you haven't seen them since then, right?" "Yes," I answered. "What more could I say?" "One of the 3 men who was with Roscoe was an undercover cop," he said. "He also disappeared, and no one can find him. Were you aware that your wife was having an affair with Mr. Jennings?" "I found out about this at the beginning of the week," I said. He nodded. "Do you have a weapon?" he asked. "No, I don't," I answered, which was true. I didn't have a gun, though I was thinking about buying one. "You know, we usually check out the husband carefully when something like this happens," he said. "Do you mind if we search your house?" "No, I don't mind," I said. I had nothing to hide, well, other than the fact that I shot 3 men, but what could I say? "I shot Roscoe and your cop in a parallel dimension? We'll get back to you, and I'd appreciate it if you could remain available," he said, standing up. "Detective," I said, "was my wife involved in something illegal?" "That's what we're trying to find out," he said. "I can't go into detail, but we've been watching Mr. Jennings for a long time." "I see," I said. He shook my hand and left. I returned home, and of course, several policemen came and thoroughly searched the house. They found nothing, except my wedding ring, which had somehow rolled under the bed. After they left, I put Andrea's things in the car and took them to her parents. I told them about the betrayal and said that Andrea left with her lover on Friday evening and has not returned since then. They were shocked when I told them this. "Do you have any idea where she might be?" asked Andrea's mother. What could I say? "Is she burning in hell?" I shook my head. "No ideas," I said, "but it doesn't matter. I'm still going to file for divorce." "I understand, son," said her father, Jack. "Please let us know if you find out anything." I promised that I would do so and left. My parents were just as shocked as Andrea's and offered to help in any way they could, but I knew there was nothing they could do. The next day, I met with a lawyer to discuss divorcing Andrea on the grounds of desertion. I explained that I had filed a missing persons report and that the police were looking into it, but the lawyer said I would have to wait a year before I could file for divorce on that basis. I thanked him and went back to work. For the next few months, life continued as usual. I worked, came home, ate, slept, and started all over again. From time to time, I would call the police station to check on the status of the missing person case, just to keep up appearances. I always got the same answer, no leads, but they were still working on it. Every day, I ended the evening with a beer and a cigarette on my porch, often thinking about my grandfather. I wondered where he was now and what he was doing. The strange thing, however, is that the cigarette case was never empty. Most days, I smoked no more than 2 cigarettes, but in the morning, the case was always completely full. I didn't complain, honestly. Have you seen the prices of cigarettes lately? For the first 6 months after the incident with Roscoe and Andrea, I focused on work and avoided women. But one day, something happened that changed everything. I bought a lottery ticket and suddenly found myself winning $85 million. I had the choice of either taking a lump sum payment of over $57 million after taxes or receiving an annual annuity payment for the next 30 years. After looking at the amounts I could receive each year, I chose the annuity. I decided to quit my job because I no longer needed the money. My colleagues said they would miss me, and I knew I would miss them too, but the truth was that over the past 6 months, I had started to feel bored. Moreover, after meeting with Elijah, something new woke up in me. I decided to buy a house in the country and found a beautiful 2-story house on 20 acres of woods. The place needed a little renovation, which was fine with me. There were also several buildings and a stable on the property. Naturally, the house had a good internet connection and all modern amenities. I moved all my belongings and rented out the old house I had lived in with Andrea, with the intention of selling it after the divorce was final. However, something was still missing. I was thinking about buying a horse but didn't know anything about caring for one. I spent many evenings at the Wrangler Bar, a small but popular establishment not far from my new home. One evening, as I sat in the Wrangler, sipping a beer and watching the game on TV, I heard a woman's voice. "An interesting case," the woman said, looking at my cigarette case. "Can I take a closer look?" I invited her to sit down and handed her the case. She examined it carefully, reading the inscription on the back. While she was looking at the case, I was looking at her, slender, well-built, with long blonde hair framing a face that could be described as girl next door cute. Her breasts were the perfect size, not too big and not too small. "It looks like it's from the Civil War," she said. "Where did you get it?" "A family heirloom," I replied. "It belonged to my great-grandfather Elijah." I opened the case and showed her the photo inside. She smiled. "Looking at them, they really seem to love each other," she said. I nodded. "That's how they lived," I said. "This should be in a museum," she said. I shook my head. "It's too valuable to me," I said. "It's hard to explain." I extended my hand to her. "I'm Amos Jones, by the way." She shook my hand. "Danny," she said. "Danny Williams. Short for Daniela." "That's a beautiful name," I said. "Thank you, good sir," she replied, smiling. "Can I treat you to something?" I asked. "Of course," she said. "I'd like a beer." I beckoned to the waitress and ordered us a beer. "Do you mind if I smoke?" I asked, opening the case. She shook her head. "Not at all," she said. "Would you mind sharing one with me?" I smiled and offered her a cigarette. I took out a match and struck it on my jeans, lighting her cigarette first. "Impressive," she said as I lit my own cigarette. I smiled, blew out the match, and put it back in the box. "What kind of cigarettes are these?" "I've never tried anything like them," she asked. "A special blend," I said. "Handmade. Do you like it?" "Absolutely," she said. I smiled. "You know, there's nothing better than a beer and a good cigarette with a friend to end the day," I said, raising my beer. She smiled, and I joined her in a little toast. We spent the evening getting to know each other. It turned out that Danny was a lawyer for a large firm in town and often spent her weekends at her parents' ranch, caring for their horses. "I'm thinking about buying a horse," I said. "That's right," she said. "You recently bought the Ackerman place. Do you know anything about horses?" I shook my head. "Nothing at all," I replied. "But I'm learning quickly." She laughed. "Well, you know, horses require a lot of care," she said. "On average, you'll probably need to devote about 4 hours a day to them. But if you're serious, I have a horse I've been wanting to sell for a long time, and I'd be happy to help you learn." "That sounds great," I said. "So, is there a Mr. Danny somewhere?" She shook her head. "Not anymore," she said, and told me about her divorce from her ex-husband, who turned out to be a drunk, a cheater, and an abuser. I listened to her story and saw that it affected her greatly. "And you?" she asked. "Almost the same story," I said. "I caught her cheating. She wanted me to be her cuckold, but I wouldn't tolerate it. Now she's left with her lover. I haven't seen her in over 6 months. In a few months, I'll file for divorce due to abandonment." I'm sorry to hear that, she said. We spent the rest of the evening talking, drinking beer, and dancing. She felt so good in my arms, and I was more content than I had been in months. Finally, the bar closed, and we had to leave. Why don't you come over tomorrow morning, and I'll introduce you to Ringo, she suggested. Ringo? I asked. Yeah, my horse, silly, she said. Agreed, I said. She gave me directions to her parents' house and her phone number. See you tomorrow morning, I said before she left. The next day, she introduced me to her parents, Bill and Kathy Williams. Bill was a huge man, and he almost crushed my hand when we shook. So, you're the guy who bought the Ackerman old place, right? He asked. I nodded. The Ackermans are good people, he added. Well, I need defense. Nice to meet you, Amos. Nice to meet you, sir, I said. Danny led me out to a fenced field and introduced me to Ringo, a very large tan horse. I didn't know what breed it was, but I was impressed by its size. Danny said he was a very affectionate animal and loved a lot of attention. She showed me how to put on the saddle and bridle and then taught me how to ride. I felt on top of the world, sitting on this creature. I followed Danny's instructions and was amazed at how well Ringo responded to my commands. We rode around the ranch for a couple of hours before Danny took us back to the pen, where she showed me how to care for him, feed him, and water him. What do you think? Danny asked as we left the pen. Very impressed, I said. How much do you want for him? Let's talk about money in a few weeks, she said. I would prefer that you spend time here first, learning how to care for him and ride him. I just want to make sure he goes to a good home. Can you do this? Of course, I said. Great, she said. I'll tell my father about this so he doesn't shoot you for stealing cattle, she added, laughing. I walked her to the door, and before entering, she turned to me. I had a great time with you this weekend, she said. I have to leave tonight to go back to town, but I'll be back Friday night. Would you like to go with me? On Friday, I asked. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek. With pleasure, she said. Now be nice to Ringo, he's still my baby, you know. I promise, I said. Thus began the next chapter in my life. I came every morning to look after Ringo. Bill and the ranch hands showed me a few more tricks, and over time, we all became good friends. I enjoyed my time there and began to feel a connection with the animal. I also noticed that I was thinking less and less about Andrea. Danny came home every Friday, and we dated for several weeks. One Friday, she came to me with a suitcase in her hand. Are you okay with an overnight guest? She asked. Please, come in, I said. We went to dinner and ended up in my bed. It had been a long time since I had been with a woman, and Danny said it had been a long time for her too. After that, we lay in each other's arms. She propped herself up on her elbow and looked into my eyes. Just so you know, she said, I am extremely monogamous and absolutely hate cheaters. Can you handle this? Absolutely, I said. And I am exclusively monogamous and do not tolerate betrayal in any form. She kissed me and looked at me. Okay, she said, because I think I'm falling in love with you. I'm glad, I told her, because I'm definitely falling in love with you. We hugged again and made love before falling asleep. Daddy says he's very impressed with the way you're taking care of Ringo, she told me the next day as we drove to her parents' ranch. I like it, I said. He's a beautiful animal. Do you still want to sell him? She asked. Absolutely, I said. She told me the amount she wanted, and I almost choked. Of course, I could afford it, but I didn't know that horses were so expensive. I knew I would have to spend over $3,000 a year to maintain him, but that wasn't a problem. Agreed, I said. Can I leave him here for a couple of weeks while I get the paddock ready? No problem, she said. A couple of weeks later, the pen was ready, and Bill brought Ringo. He looked at what I had done to the pen and was impressed with the new shelter I had built for the animal. Damn, son, he said, this horse is going to be spoiled. Did you put a TV or two? He asked, laughing. I thought about it, I said, laughing with him. After we got Ringo settled in, Bill looked at me seriously. You know, Danny really loves you a lot, he said. Very much, I replied. Yes, sir, I said, and I love her very much too. He nodded before speaking again. I know, he said. I just want you to know that she is still my little girl, and I will do everything I can to protect her. Her last husband was a real stupid, and it took me a lot of effort not to skin him. Just promise me something. What exactly? I asked. Treat her right, he said. Don't ever make my girl cry. If you do this, you will always be a welcome guest in my home. I promise, Mr. Williams, I said, holding out my hand. He shook my hand and smiled. I'll hold you to your word for that, son, he said. Well, I have to go. See you soon. Danny and I continued dating over the next few months. During this time, our love for each other grew and turned into something special. We talked about everything, our hopes and dreams for the future, about children, about everything. Like me, she wanted children and often talked about retiring in the country one day. She wisely never mentioned marriage, but I sensed it was on her mind. A year after the incident with Roscoe and Andrea, I contacted my lawyer. He still had the documents ready to submit. Over the past year, I made sure that I had completed all the legal steps. Naturally, the authorities never found Andrea. I knew they wouldn't, and the case is now considered unsolved. My lawyer said that in 30 days, I would be a free man. I took out Grandma Elizabeth's ring and decided to have it cleaned and adjusted for Danny. I was planning to propose to her the weekend after the divorce became final. Life was definitely going well. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and thought about the events of the last year. It was one hell of a crazy ride. A little over a year ago, I walked in on my first wife, Andrea, in bed with her boss in her house. To make matters worse, they did it in our marital bed. Andrea wanted me to accept her dirty affair and threatened to ruin me if I chose divorce. The next day, after I visited the lawyer, I met a man who introduced himself as a justice of the peace. In fact, he turned out to be my great-great-great-grandfather, Elijah Jones, a man who died serving in the Union Army under General William Tecumseh Sherman. Justice, or rather, Grandpa Elijah, helped me deal with 2 traitors. Over the next year, I filed for divorce after reporting Andrea missing, won the lottery, quit my job as an IT and networking field technician, and then bought a house in the country. It was there that I met Danny Williams, the current love of my life. She introduced me to Ringo, my horse, and taught me how to care for and ride him. We also dated and fell in love. Her parents, Bill and Kathy Williams, took me under their wing and helped me adapt to life in the countryside. Over the past few months, we have gotten to know each other very well. Her parents traditionally went to church on Sundays and then had a big family dinner before spending the day relaxing. I was invited to join them whenever I wanted, and I often accepted their offer, mostly to be close to Danny, but I also enjoyed hanging out with Bill and Kathy. If the weather allowed, I would ride Ringo to their ranch, which was not far from my home. However, today was not just another Sunday visit. I intended to propose to Danny and hoped she would accept. Nervous, I looked at myself in the mirror again. Are you ready for this, Amos? I asked my reflection. By the way, my name is Amos Jones. The reflection did not answer, but I answered myself, come on, go ahead. I grabbed my hat and jacket, making sure I had the ring in my pocket, then walked out of the house and toward the paddock, where Ringo was waiting for me at the gate. I had already saddled him for the ride, and he seemed to know where we were going. He shook his head as I petted him. He was such a gentle creature, and it was hard to believe that such a gentle creature could have such power. I climbed onto the saddle and made myself comfortable. I loved riding him. I felt on top of the world when I was in the saddle. After spurring him with my boots, we hit the road. I arrived at their location on time and placed Ringo in their pen. As I walked toward the house, I saw Danny waiting for me at the door. She gave me a kiss as I took her into my arms. Long time no see, cowboy, she said, breaking the kiss. Yes, has it been 10 hours? I asked, smiling. She smiled back and playfully hit my arm. Come in, she said. Mama's already laid everything on the table, and I'm dying of hunger. Well then, let's not keep her waiting, I said. We entered the house holding hands. Her father, a giant of a man, stood up and shook my hand. You're getting better and better with this horse, he said, smiling. You'll make a cowboy, I'm sure. I had a good teacher, I said, looking at Danny. He laughed and motioned for us to go into the dining room, where there was a large table laden with food. This smells amazing, Katie, I said. Thank you. I hope you like it, she said. I thought, what's not to like here? Steaks, mashed potatoes, brown gravy, green beans, and homemade bread. I was already drooling. Well, let's sit down at the table, said Bill. I have a couple of things I'd like to discuss, if that's okay, I said. Everyone looked at me, probably wondering what I was going to say. Keep going, son, Bill said. Well, first of all, my divorce from Andrea is finalized, I said, and I'm ready to start a new chapter in my life, I added, looking at Danny. I pulled a small box out of my pocket and got down on one knee in front of her. These last few months have been wonderful, I said, and I never want it to end. I am madly in love with you, Danny, and I would be honored if you would marry me and be my wife. Danny put her hands to her face, and her mother wiped a tear from her eye. Danny hugged me and started showering me with kisses. Yes, Amos, she said. I will marry you. I love you so much. I opened the box and put the ring on her finger. She smiled, looking at the ring. It's a beautiful ring, she said. I've never seen anything like it. This is my great-great-great-grandfather Elijah's ring that he gave to his fiancée many years ago, I said. It's a family heirloom. It's beautiful, Katie said, and in such good condition. Danny, you have to take care of it. I will, Mom, she said. It will never leave my hand. Bill looked touched and extended his hand. Welcome to the family, son, he said. Thank you, Dad, I said. This brought a smile to his face. Well, looks like we have a lot to celebrate today, he added as he sat down. After the main course, Katie brought out homemade apple pie and served a large slice to everyone. Then Danny and I rode out on horseback and ended up at a large pond at the back of their property. After securing our horses, Danny and I celebrated our love outdoors. We lay there on the blanket, looking at the sky. After hours of love, Danny raised her hand and admired her ring. It's a really gorgeous ring, she said. Is this the same ring you gave Andrea? Yes, I said. If you want, I can buy you another one. Don't even think about it, she said. I love this ring. Do you think your grandmother Elizabeth would approve of me wearing it? I'm sure of it, I said. One day I will show you her diaries. She wrote a lot about her husband. She really admired him and wanted his family to never forget him. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? I asked. For making this day so special for me, she said, and for proposing in front of my parents. It meant a lot to them. Well, you're everything to me, I said. And you are everything to me, too, my future husband, she replied. We lay on the blanket for some time before we decided it was time to go home. Did you two enjoy the view by the pond? Bill asked when we returned. Yes, Daddy, Danny answered, kissing his cheek. He smiled, looking at her. I'm glad, he said. You know, your mom and I used to go there a lot when we first got married, he added with a sly smile. We still go sometimes, if you know what I mean. Too much information, Dad, Danny said. That's too much information, she added with a smile. Bill laughed. He turned to me after Danny went to her mother's kitchen. You did great, son, he said. Katie and I are proud to have you in our family now. Thank you, Dad, I said. Do you mind if I call you Dad? You just have to, he said with a big smile. And it would mean a lot if you called Katie Mom, he added. I will, I said. It's late, and I need to put Ringo to bed for the night, so if you don't mind, I'll go. Bill nodded, indicating that he understood. Sounds good, son, he said. I'm sure I'll see you soon. We shook hands, and I went into the kitchen to say goodbye. Katie hugged me tightly, and I hugged her back. Thanks for lunch, Mom, I said. It was amazing. She hugged me again, and tears appeared in her eyes. Thank you for everything, Amos, she said. I turned to Danny. Listen, I need to run some errands in town tomorrow afternoon, I said. Would you like to go out for dinner and drinks in the evening, say 6 o'clock? Danny worked as a lawyer and spent weeks at her apartment in the city, as it was closer to her work. Of course, she said. Just text me the details, and I'll meet you there. Definitely, I said. I love you. I added, kissing her. She kissed back. I love you more, she said. Come on, you too, Katie said, slapping Danny's arm with a dish towel. I have a lot of work to do, so get out of here. We all said our goodbyes, and I went to put Ringo up. At that moment, I felt on top of the world. I had a good horse and a good woman, life couldn't be better, I thought. The next day, I got up early as usual, took care of Ringo, and went into town. I had a few things I wanted to get done, and I also wanted to move into the old house I once shared with Andrea. The house was still in my name, and I was renting it to George and Linda Simmons, a young couple who were planning to start a family. They were good people, took good care of the house, and always paid their rent on time. George even expressed interest in buying the house, and I really wanted to help them. I was thinking about paying off the mortgage and giving them the house, but I wasn't sure what the consequences of doing so would be. Would I lose taxes on this? Would this affect property values? I just didn't know. I made a mental note to consult with my financial advisor to find out what plan would be best. When I finished my visit, I looked at my watch and noticed it was already 4:30 p.m., so I texted Danny that I would meet her at the Hitching Post bar. It was the same bar and grill where I met Justice a little over a year ago. She texted me back, "See you there." "Love you." "Love you more," I wrote back. A few seconds later, I saw a message from her filled with hearts and kisses. God, how I love this woman, I thought. "Hey, cowboy," she said as she approached my table. I stood up, kissed her, then pushed back my chair. We ordered a burger and beer and discussed the events of the day. Danny had just finished a big project she'd been working on for months and was enjoying the thought of finally having some free time. When our plates were cleared, I saw him, Justice, or to be more precise, my grandfather Elijah. He saw me and headed toward our table. I stood up as he approached and shook his hand. I almost called him grandfather, but stopped myself just in time. "Danny," I said, "this is my good friend Justice of the Peace. He helped me get through my problems with Andrea." "Justice, this is my fiancé, Danny Williams." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Peace," she said with a smile. "Please call me Justice," he said. Mr. Peace was my father. He looked at her ring. "You have a beautiful ring, young lady." "Thank you," she said. Amos said it belonged to his great-great-great-great-grandmother Elizabeth. For a moment, I thought I saw a tear in his eye. He wiped his eyes and smiled. "Will you have a beer?" I asked him. "After all, I owe you one." "Yes, you should," he said. "And I'll be happy to have a beer." When the waitress brought our beers, I offered him and Danny a cigarette. They both accepted it gratefully. Pulling one out for myself, I struck a match and lit their cigarettes before lighting mine. "Glad to see you finally have some decent clothes," he said with a smile. "The hat is good too. I remember when that old thing looked this good." We chatted for a bit, but I was curious as to what brought him back. "So, what brings you to these parts?" I asked. "Well," he began, "I have a situation, and I need your help. In fact, I would really appreciate it if you both would help." "What's happening?" asked Danny. "The guy found himself in a situation similar to what Amos faced with his first wife," he said, "only this guy's situation is much worse. He tried to cope with it himself, but in the end, he took on more than he could handle." "About?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "He went to a camp in Idaho for 3 months to get better. He came back, and everything fell to pieces, pardon the expression." "Where is he now?" asked Danny. "He's being held against his will in some secret underground prison facility in the Acme building by the river," he said. Danny and I looked at him in shock. "Held against his will?" asked Danny. "It's illegal," he said. "Yes, ma'am, it is. And he feels very bad. They keep him on bread and water and treat him really badly." "How did you know about this?" asked Danny. "I visited him a little earlier," he said. "How did you do it?" she asked. "I fooled the guards," he said. "Used my old ranger badge." "Were you in the Texas Rangers?" asked Danny. Justice nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "A long time ago. Served under a different name." "Who was your captain?" she asked. I realized she was trying to relate to his story, so I didn't say anything. "Bill McDonald," he said. "He retired a long time ago." "I understand," Danny said. "So you were in Company A?" "No, ma'am," he said. "Company B, front battalion." Danny nodded slightly. "And how did you know about this man?" she asked. "He asked for help," Justice said. "I was assigned this case." "Who are you working for now?" she asked. "FBI. For the highest authority, ma'am," he said. "You said he was in a camp in northern Idaho," Danny continued. "What kind of camp is this?" "Camp Rollins, ma'am," he said. "His name is Michael Bradley." "Bradley," she repeated. "I know that name. I heard something from the Roland camp a couple of months ago about him, very unusual charges. I tried to contact him, but I never succeeded. I even called my contact at the camp to get more information, but no one ever reported him missing." "I'm not surprised," he said. "What about his wife?" she asked. He was told his wife was dead, killed in a plane crash, Justice said. But you don't believe it, do you? She asked. Not for a minute, he said. Where do you think she is now? Somewhere in Albania, he said. She is being sold into slavery and given a lethal mixture of contaminated illegal substances. She is on borrowed time, and there's no one on earth who can help her. She is finding peace with God and hopes to see her husband before she leaves. And who sells her? Danny continued. A lying, sneaky piece of dog excrement named Doug Carson, he said. The same one who framed and imprisoned Mike? Doug Carson? You mean the CEO of Acme Enterprises? One of the richest and most powerful people on the planet? Danny asked in shock. The same one, Justice said. And how did you know all this? I told you that I work for the highest authorities, he said. I just know. Don't ask me how. Look, ma'am, I understand that you want everything on paper, but I have two people who won't last much longer if nothing is done. And even after I get Mike out of there, Carson will just find himself a new victim. I can get Mike out one way or another. I would prefer to do it legally and would like to see Acme torn down. Everything has to be according to the law. Danny looked at Justice, and I could see her mind working. Okay, she said. Let me go back and do some preliminary work. We can meet here at the same time tomorrow if that suits you. Justice nodded. I think they'll be fine until then, he said, but they don't have much time. Okay, Justice, she said. I'll get to it right away. I promise I'll have the answers when we meet tomorrow. I'm grateful for that, ma'am, he said. She looked at us, then stood up. I'll call you tomorrow, okay, honey, she said, looking at me. Sounds good, honey, I said. Love you. Love you more, she said, kissing me softly on the lips. She extended her hand to Justice. We'll talk tomorrow, I promise. Thank you, he said, shaking her hand. Sorry if I seem harsh. I know you're a great lawyer and just doing your job. The fact is that there are two souls at stake, and there is very little time. I understand, she said before walking away. We watched her leave the bar. That's a damn good woman, son, he said, looking at me. Reminds me of your Grandma Lizzie at her age. I smiled. I consider this the highest praise, grandfather, I said. So, I understand she doesn't know the whole story, he said. I shook my head. No, I said. You'll have to tell her someday, you know, he said. I nodded. I know, I said. I just don't know how to do this without sounding completely crazy. He laughed. You will find a way, he said. By the way, speaking of your grandmother Elizabeth, she said that Danny is a keeper and you better treat her right. Trust me, boy, she doesn't mind slapping you upside the head. You look like you'd like it, I said. He laughed, then took a sip of his beer. Perhaps, he said. It's been a long time since Grandma gave a grown man a slap on the head. He pulled out a large watch, opened it, then closed it. He looked at me before speaking. I have to go, son, he said. See you tomorrow at the same time. Thanks for the beer. You're welcome, Grandpa, I said, holding out my hand. He took it in his and hugged me. It's good to see you again, son, he said. It's a shame it's not under the best circumstances. Me too, I said. See you tomorrow. He touched the brim of his hat. See you, he said as he left. I paid the bill, then got in my truck and drove home, thinking about what Elijah had told me. He was right, I'd have to explain everything to Danny someday, but how? The next day, I got up early as usual, grabbed a cup of coffee, and went to look after Ringo. I sensed that he was a little nervous, so I saddled him up and took him for a short walk. It seemed to me that he wanted to run, but I was afraid he might accidentally step into a hole and fall. I returned to the dirt road and let him go. Talk about a walk with the breeze. He galloped for quite a long time, and I held on for dear life. I brought Ringo back, took care of his needs, and went into the house to take a shower. After I cleaned myself up, I went downstairs and grabbed a sandwich. Then my phone rang. I saw it was Danny's number and answered. Hi, sweetie, I said. How are you? Okay, she said. A little tired, but everything is fine. Listen, can you come to my apartment around 3? I need to talk to you before we meet with Justice tonight. Of course, I said. Everything is fine? Yes, she said. I just need to think about something, that's all. Okay, I said. See you at 3. I knocked on her door at exactly 3 o'clock, and she let me in with a kiss. I realized she had just gotten out of the shower, as her hair was still a little damp. "Come in," she said. "I just got out of the shower." "Sit down, and I'll get us some coffee." I sat down as she went to the kitchen. Her laptop was open on the table, and there were papers scattered across it. She returned with 2 cups and placed them on the table before sitting down. "Are you okay?" I asked, bothered that she looked tired. "I'm just tired," she said. "Since I saw you last night, I've slept maybe 3 hours. I started doing preliminary research last night. As you know, I like to know something about the people I work with. I did a search in the LexisNexis database for your friend, but didn't find anything. No birth certificate, no social security number, no tax records, nothing, not even a driver's license." She took a sip of coffee and looked at me. "He also said he served in the Texas Rangers under Bill McDonald," she said. "He correctly identified the company and battalion, but there is no possibility that he served under McDonald." She turned the laptop toward me and opened a browser page. It was a page about William Jesse Bill McDonald. "Bill McDonald died in 1989 of pneumonia," she said. "This was over 100 years ago. There is no way that Justice could have served under him unless he's much more than 100 years old." She looked at me before continuing. "There's one more thing," she said. "I had lunch with Judge Stone today." "That same judge? Executioner? Hasn't he been on the bench for what seems like forever?" I asked. "Yes," Danny said. "He and my father have known each other for a long time. He was the one who inspired me to go to law school. Actually, I told him a little about what was going on. When I mentioned Justice, his face went white. I thought he was going to have a stroke." "Is it true?" I asked. "Did you mention Justice by name?" "Yes," Danny said. "So, who is he?" I took a sip of coffee and weighed my options. I knew that I would have to confess eventually, but I wasn't sure how to do it. Danny helped me understand this. "Listen, Amos," she said. "I love you with all my heart and plan to spend the rest of my life with you, but we shouldn't have secrets between us. I need you to be honest with me. I need to know the truth, the whole truth." I looked at her for a few moments before answering. "What do they say? The truth will set you free?" This moment could end my relationship with Danny, and I knew it. "The truth is stranger than you can imagine," I said. "I can handle it," she said. "The good, the bad, the ugly, the weird, you name it, I've heard it all before." "You haven't heard this yet," I said. "Well, try me," she replied. I nodded. "Promise you won't send me to a mental hospital?" I asked. She smiled. "Is it really that strange?" she asked. "You have no idea," I said. "Well, just tell me, and I'll judge," she said. "Okay," I said. "Let's begin, but remember, I warned you." I took another sip of coffee and began. "The day I found out about Andrea's infidelity, I went to the hitching post to drown my sorrows in beer. That's when I first met him, Justice. He came up to me and started a conversation. He knew everything about me and my problem with Andrea. At first, I thought he was a private detective. Then he suggested that we take them by surprise the next evening when Andrea brought her lover into the bedroom to turn me into a cuckold. He appeared," I continued. "He didn't even look human, Danny, and his eyes looked like fire. The next thing I knew, we were standing in the middle of a dusty street in a town that felt like an Old West town. I entered the saloon and saw Andrea, her lover, and his 3 thugs. The thugs came at me, and I pulled out my gun and shot them." "Did you shoot them?" Danny asked in shock. "To death," I nodded. "Yes, I'm not proud of it, but they pulled their guns and would have shot me if I hadn't done it. Then, when Roscoe, Andrea's lover, pointed a gun at me, I shot him too. When he fell, their table overturned, and the lamp set Andrea's dress on fire. There was nothing I could do to put out the fire. The next second, they were all gone." "Oh my God," Danny said. I asked Justice if they were all dead, and he said yes. I added, he said they were in a very warm place. We went outside, and he gave me this. I showed her my cigarette case. At that moment, I realized who he really was. "Who is he?" asked Danny. "Tell me." I opened my cigarette case, took out a photograph, and handed it to her. "Take a good look at the man in this photo," I said. Her eyes widened as she studied the photo. She looked at me again in shock. Are you saying that Justice is actually your great-great-great-great-grandfather Elijah? She asked. You saw him up close, I said. You spoke to him. You have his photograph in your hands. Oh my God, Danny said when she realized this. How is this even possible? I shook my head. I don't know, I said. He promised to tell me one day. I know my grandmother Elizabeth wrote a lot about him. She said his sense of justice and right and wrong was part of what attracted her to him. Even after he was shot in the war, she said it was as if he was still there. That's why she never married again. In one entry, she wrote that she once found a burning cigarette in his favorite ashtray. There was no one else in the house. Danny's eyes widened when I said this. She handed over her wedding ring, saying that she always hoped the woman who wore it would marry a man with the same sense of justice that he had, with the same desire to stand up for the oppressed. I said. Danny looked at her ring, and her eyes filled with tears. You really feel connected to him, don't you? She asked, looking at me. I nodded. Yes, I said. I can't explain it, but I feel like I want to follow in his footsteps sometimes. She smiled and stroked my cheek. I can feel it, she said. So do you believe me? Are we still a couple? I asked with concern. She kissed me softly before answering. I believe you, she said. And of course we're still a couple. I'm going to marry you, Amos Jones, and I'm going to give you a house full of children. I plan to grow old with you. I love you with all my heart, Amos. Never forget this. She hugged me, and we kissed, our tears flowing together. So what did Judge Stone say when you told him what was going on? I asked when we broke the hug and calmed down. He said if justice was involved, it must be something important, she said. He signed a court order to release Mike into his custody. The order does not mention justice by name but states that Mike must be released to whichever authority presents the order. Judge Stone worded this order very carefully. He also said he would do whatever he could to help. Well, that's good, I said. What else did you find out? It appears that several federal agencies are interested in the activities of Acme Enterprises, she said. I spoke with a good friend at the Department of Justice and learned that they are preparing for a full-scale investigation. We are talking about trafficking in people, illegal substances, illegal sales of weapons, connections with terrorists, and so on. They want evidence that they believe only exists in the cloud. The problem is that they were unable to access anything that could be used in court. Apparently, this data is hidden so deeply that no one can get to it. They believe there is a computer somewhere in Albania that can unlock this evidence. Albania? I asked. Isn't that where Elijah said Mike's wife is? You noticed it too, she said. Do you think they can be in the same place? Who knows? I said. Can't they get the CIA to figure this out? She shook her head. There is such chaos in Washington right now that it seems like none of them can even use the restroom without risking investigation, she said. Everyone is too busy trying to cover their asses. It looks like your friend took a risk by telling you all this. Yes, Danny said. A lot of people are frustrated and are jumping at any opportunity. What did you find out about Mike? I asked. I reviewed the report I received from Rollins, she said, and I studied the employment contract he gave them. According to the report, Mike was offered the job with a letter saying he had something interesting for them. The problem is that what they really wanted was his wife. She basically became a corporate mistress, used and abused in ways you can't even imagine. So this was all planned? I said. Yes, she said. His employment contract was for life, and he was promised the same remuneration no matter what he did. But there are many problems with the contract that make it invalid. To summarize, he was hired and contracted under false pretenses to cover up the company's illegal activities. Add to this the fact that he was illegally imprisoned, tortured, beaten, and had his life and marriage destroyed. There's a lot more, but that's the main thing. It would take me years to file all the possible tort claims, and that doesn't even include the criminal cases involved in all of this. It could take decades for this to come to trial, if it ever comes to trial at all. I take it you have a plan? I asked. Yes, she said. I've already sketched something out, but I want to discuss it with you and Elijah first. Okay, I said, looking at my watch. I hadn't noticed how quickly the time had passed, but I saw that we had just enough time left for Danny to get dressed before we had to leave. You need to get dressed, honey. It's time to go. She kissed me again and went to the bedroom. We arrived at the hitching post 10 minutes before we were due to meet Elijah, and we were shown to a table in a quiet corner of the bar. We had just settled in when he came in. We stood up as he was shown to the table and ordered beers. "It's good to see you again, Grandpa Elijah," Danny said, shaking his hand. He looked at me, puzzled for a moment before speaking. "I take it you told her everything?" he asked. "I told you," I said. "Well, let this be a lesson to you, son," he said. "Never try to deceive your wife, especially if she is a lawyer." "Do you mind if I call you Grandpa Elijah?" she asked him. He smiled widely before answering. "I'll be offended if you don't, young lady," he said as we sat down. "By the way," he said, looking at Danny, "you once wondered if Lizzie would approve of you wearing her ring. Not only does she approve, but she told me to tell you that she can't think of anyone more worthy of wearing it. And I have to admit, it looks just as beautiful on you as it does on her." "Thank you, Grandpa," she said, hugging him, her eyes moist. "I would like to meet your wife." According to Amos, she was an incredible woman. "She's the best," he said, hugging her back. "And who knows? Maybe one day you'll meet her," he added with a wink. After the waitress brought us the beer, we got down to business. Danny held out the writ signed by Judge Stone and handed it to Elijah. "Here is the writ signed by Judge Stone," she said. "Is this Alfred Stone?" he asked. Danny nodded. "I met him once a long time ago. Good man." Danny repeated everything we had discussed earlier that day and then laid out her plan. Elijah and I listened in silence, and his face broke into a smile when she finished. "I like the way you think, young lady," he said. "You better stay on the good side of this woman, son," he added, looking at me. We all laughed at this. I have to admit, her idea sounded crazy enough to work. We discussed a few details of the plan and what Danny had learned from her friend. "So you think this computer is in Albania?" he asked. "Yes, that's exactly what my friend thinks," she said. Elijah looked at me. "I guess that means you're coming with us," he said. "With us?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "I'm putting together a team. They are all good shooters, but they know nothing about computers. This is your field of activity, remember? So we're going to Albania?" I asked. "That's true," he said. "Carson flew to Albania early this morning on a corporate jet. I have already scouted the place and have a plan of attack. We will have to book tickets and get passports. This may take a while." I said. Elijah laughed and shook his head. "No need, son," he said. "I've already arranged everything." "So when are we leaving?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll meet you both at your house at dawn," he added, looking at me. "Okay," I said. "Let's do this." We all agreed to the plan and stood up to leave. Elijah turned to Danny. "So when are you two getting married?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "We just got engaged on Sunday and haven't had a chance to discuss it yet." "That's true," he said. "It was just before you two went down to the pond." "Did you see this?" she asked, shocked. "Not personally, but I heard about it," he said with a smile. "Don't worry. I was young once. I just hope you don't put off the wedding too long, if you know what I mean," he added, glancing at her belly. Her eyes widened. "You mean," she began. He smiled and nodded. "Yes," he said. "How did you know?" she asked. "I can tell a lot by looking at a person," he said. "Better get back. Tomorrow is going to be a hell of a day." We said goodbye and headed towards the exit. Danny decided to come home with me. "Did you hear what you said?" "Elijah," she asked as I drove the car. "What? Are you pregnant?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "How do you feel about this?" "Happy and excited," I told her. "I will become a father." "Wow, I think we'll have to get married pretty quickly." "Do you still want it?" she asked. "Hell yes," I told her. "I love you, and I can't bear to be apart from you," I added, kissing her hand. "When this is all over, what do you say we get married?" "I'd love to," she said, clinging to me. "Then I think we'll have to turn one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery," I said. We talked about the kids all the way home. When we returned, we went upstairs and made love before falling asleep in each other's arms. We both woke up at 4 a.m. and showered together before getting dressed. We drank a quick cup of coffee before Elijah knocked on the door. "Ready?" he asked me. I nodded my head. "Fine. I think I need to swear allegiance to you first." "Okay," I said. He nodded. "Raise your right hand," he said. I did as he said. Do you promise and swear and all that? He asked. Yes, I swear, I said. He pinned the badge on my shirt. Congratulations. You are now a deputy sheriff with all the rights and protections that come with it, he said. And may God have mercy on your soul. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet, son, he said. We've just started. He turned to Danny. Do you have a restraining order? Here it is, she said, handing it to him. He nodded. Okay, he said. It probably won't take long, so I'll have you saddle up Ringo and meet us at the edge of the clearing overlooking Jacob's ravine. Okay, she said. Meet me there. We all went outside, and Elijah walked up to his horse. He returned with a rope in one hand and a rifle in the other. I realized it was a Winchester Model 1892 in .44-40 with a modified lever. He handed me the rifle. This is for you, son, he said. It was slightly modified especially for you. He pointed to a small pin on the underside of the lever. Raise it until it clicks, and all you have to do is cycle the lever to fire. You don't even have to pull the trigger. Come on, try it. He pointed to a tree stump in the middle of the backyard. Fire 5 good shots at that stump, he said. Just keep the rifle pointing in the same direction. I raised the pin until it clicked and pressed the rifle to my shoulder, just as my father had taught me so long ago. No, son, said Elijah. Shoot from the hip. I pressed the butt of the rifle against my upper thigh for support and aimed it as he said. That's it, Elijah said. I cycled the lever quickly 5 times. I was amazed at the ease with which the lever moved. Each time the rifle fired, I saw all 5 shots hit the center of the stump. When I was done, I lowered the pin and cycled the rifle again to eject the last shell. Wow! Danny exclaimed. Elijah smiled and patted me on the back. I was pleased with myself. You will still make a lawyer, son, said Elijah. Danny turned to me with a smile, her eyes sparkling. My husband is a gunslinger, she declared proudly. Dad will go crazy when he sees this. That was cool, wasn't it? I asked her. It was really cool, she said. Now these bad guys don't stand a chance. I laughed. Well, if you two are done playing, we should go, said Elijah. Do you want to go in my car? I asked. Elijah shook his head. No need, he said. Just stay here. As I watched, he twirled the rope over our heads and threw the noose at us. The next moment, we found ourselves in an empty corridor. Follow me, he said. I will speak. You just keep an eye on security. Got it? I said. Elijah opened the door and walked inside. I followed him. 3 guards stood up as we entered. How can we help? Asked one of them. Elijah took the court order from his pocket and handed it to the guard. We came for Michael Bradley, he said. The guard looked at the order, saw the official signature and seal, and turned to the other guard. Bring Bradley, he said, turning to us. I was keeping an eye on both guards, but it seemed they were also keeping an eye on me, or more accurately, the modified rifle in my right hand. A minute later, the guard returned with Mike. Remove the handcuffs, Elijah ordered. They carried out the order and pushed Mike towards us. Elijah placed Mike behind him and slowly walked out of the office. I waited until he was almost out the door, rifle at the ready, before I followed him. Once in the corridor, Elijah took out his lasso, and the next moment we found ourselves in a clearing near Jacob's ravine. I looked down the hill and saw my house. Danny came out of the woods, leading Ringo by the reins. She kissed me on the lips and handed me the reins, then turned to Mike. You must be Michael Bradley, she said. He nodded. Yes, ma'am, it's me, he said. I'm Danny Williams, she said. I tried to contact you, but I couldn't. It's okay, he said, still shaken by what happened. It wasn't your fault. I put the rifle in the holster that Danny had attached to Ringo and saw Elijah ride up on his giant horse. There were 7 other horsemen with him. I tried to make out their faces, but they were somehow blurry. Who are these guys? I asked. That guy over there is Pat Garrett, Elijah said. Beside him are Bat Masterson, Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Bill Tillman, Wild Bill Hickok, and of course, my old boss Bill McDonald. They all nodded their heads in turn and touched the brims of their hats when Elijah introduced them. I thought, since we're going up against the worst, we need the best. Nice to meet you, I said. One of them spoke. Are you sure you want to take this new recruit with you? Elijah asked the man. Damn, he's barely out of diapers. I thought the comment came from Doc Holliday, but I wasn't sure. Have you ever fired a revolver, boy? He asked. Yes, sir, he did, I said. I mean into a person, he added. He shot, I said, and I will do it again if necessary. I don't know, Elijah said. We're already dead, so they can't kill us again. I don't have time to babysit a young mortal. Do you know anything about computers? What the hell is a computer? Asked the man. The others laughed. Exactly, Elijah said. He is my grandson. He is also my deputy. He's driving, period. He's protected, and he can handle it cold, Elijah said to the man. This is your group, you are in charge. That's right, said Elijah. He turned to Mike. Have you ever ridden a horse, boy? Mike shook his head. No, sir, he said. Elijah extended his hand to him. Okay, get up, Elijah said. Just hold on tight because it's going to shake a little. He turned to me. Kiss your woman and let's go, son. Yes, sir, I said. I hugged Danny tightly and kissed her. Don't worry, baby, one of the men said. We'll have him home in time for dinner. The others chuckled, breaking the kiss. I climbed onto Ringo. I love you, Danny, I said. I love you too, she said. She turned to Elijah as I rode up to him and Mike. Elijah Jones, you better bring my man back to me safe and sound, she said loudly. If you want him to be okay, she added. Elijah looked at me, raising his eyebrows in surprise when she spoke to him. Are you sure she's not related to your grandma Lizzie? He asked. They sound very similar. We all laughed about it. He turned to her again and smiled. Don't worry, Danny, he said. Your son will not grow up without a father. I promise you this. I turned to her. Watch my message, I said, and prepare everything for later. I'll be fine, she said. I love you. I love you more, I said, turning back to the front. Elijah looked at us all before giving the command. Go, he shouted, driving his spurs into his horse. We all joined him, and I held on tight while Ringo ran as fast as the other horses. I saw that we were heading towards the cliff marking the ravine and wondered if we were going to jump over the edge. Suddenly, a large dark hole opened in front of us, just above the ground. And when I thought we were going to fall off the cliff, we went through this hole and ended up in another place. I didn't know where we were, but I assumed it was Albania. It was still dark here, and the moon was shining brightly. We stopped at the top of a hill and looked around. Below, I saw a fenced-in complex with a large building in one corner. It seemed like the only entrance was through a large iron gate. What the hell is this? Wild Bill asked, pointing to the opposite end of the complex. I looked and saw a pretty new Learjet. It's a Learjet, I said. Airplane, I realized that these people probably had no idea what I was talking about. It flies like a bird. You're kidding me, he said. I saw something like this before the Great War, said Bill McDonald, referring to World War I, but what I saw was much smaller and had 2 wings. We've come a long way since then, I said. Looks like it, he replied. That means Carson is here, Elijah said, and he probably brought reinforcements. Isn't this the head of this operation? Asked Doc Holliday. Yes, said Elijah, and I'm sure they all have automatic weapons. What is an automatic weapon? Asked Wild Bill. It shoots as long as you hold the trigger, I said. A modern version of the old Gatling gun. I'm not sure I like your age, rookie, said Wild Bill. Flying cars, automatic weapons, crap. But we have electricity, hot and cold water, and indoor toilets, I said. The others laughed. How are we all going to get through this gate? Asked Wyatt, as he had an important question. Elijah and the rest could probably walk through as if they weren't there, but Mike, Ringo, and I couldn't. I didn't think Elijah's lasso was big enough to cover all of us with horses and equipment. Elijah pulled out a long Civil War rifle with a scope that ran the length of the barrel. I didn't know where he hid it. I'll take care of it, he said. As soon as the gate opens, you guys will go in there and lure them out. Make as much noise as possible. Shoot to kill. Mike, Amos, and I will go into the building and do what we need to do. Mike will deal with Carson and his ex, and Amos will get evidence against Acme. I'll come back and help you finish the job. Any questions? No prisoners, said Pat Garrett. Elijah shook his head. No, he said. No prisoners. Everyone nodded in understanding. "Okay," said Elijah, "it's time to act." He raised the rifle to his shoulder and took careful aim. When he fired, I saw sparks fly up at the junction of the gate and the fence. When the gate opened, the other men rushed toward it, shooting. Alarms went off, and bright lights flooded the complex as men armed with AK-47s ran out to meet the threat. Elijah stayed back until they were sure everyone had left the building. We moved forward and entered the building through large double doors, which the men inside opened as they came outside. Looking to my left, I saw what looked like an office and headed in that direction while Elijah and Mike headed to the center of the building, where a woman was lying on a bed connected to wires and tubes. I tied Ringo to a post on the floor, took the rifle and saddlebags, and went inside. There was a laptop on the table next to the file cabinet, so I put down the rifle and saddlebags and opened the screen. Damn! I thought it was blocked. I looked around for anything that could tell me the password but found nothing. In desperation, I took the laptop and looked at the bottom. Of course, there was a piece of paper stuck there with a set of letters and numbers. I entered them and was surprised to find myself in their system. I quickly looked and saw several folders with documents, videos, and photos. I figured I didn't have much time, so I opened my browser, logged into my secure online FTP, and started transferring files. While this was happening, I looked through the file cabinet and found many folders marked Acme. There were tons of documents, DVDs, and flash drives, so I stuffed everything I could into my saddlebags. I waited and watched as the file transfer continued. I heard the sound of gunfire outside and hoped that I would make it before they returned. I looked out the side window and saw Mike standing next to the bed. Elijah had already left to join his group on the street. I could only wonder what was happening. As we approached the bed in the center of the building, I looked at the woman and realized that it was my unfaithful ex-wife, Gloria. She looked terrible, she had lost a lot of weight, and her face was gaunt. There were several tubes connected to her, and I could only guess what they were injecting into her. I hated what she did, but I hated seeing this even more. The big man stopped his horse and helped me down. I saw rage in his gaze. "You have two jobs, partner," he said. "First, you need to help your ex-wife transition. What she did to you was wrong, and she knows it. She's paying for it now and won't last long. She has already made peace with God, and now she needs to make peace with you. I know it will be hard, but you have to let her do it. If you don't do this, it will haunt you for the rest of your life. Remember, this is for your own good. Do you understand me?" I nodded. "Yes, sir," I said. He nodded and handed me the biggest knife I had ever seen in my life. "The next thing you need to do is kill the idiot who did this," he said. "Do you think you can handle it?" "Absolutely," I said. "Okay," he said. "My group and I will give you all the time you need. Don't lose this knife." I promised the guy who lent it to me that I would return it. "I won't lose it," I said. He got back on his horse and rode off in the direction we had come from. I turned to Gloria, her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Mike," she asked in a weak voice, "is that really you?" I nodded. "Yes, it's me," I said. "What happened to you?" "They're killing me, Mike," she said. "After I signed the divorce papers you filed, Doug said we were going to Europe to celebrate a big business deal. Only later did I find out that he was actually going to sell me into slavery. They brought me here and used me horribly for several weeks. Then they connected me to all this. Doug was very angry at you, and he took it out on me. He told me that you died. He said you attacked him, and security had to eliminate you." "Looks like we've both been duped," I said. "That's right, cuckold," I heard Doug say. I looked up to see him standing at the foot of Gloria's bed, a grin on his face. "How did you get here so quickly?" "You've just been released." "Least I will have to visit Judge Stone and thank him personally for this, you an idiot," I growled. "Remember what I told you the last time I saw you?" "Yes," Doug said, "something about killing me." "How do you do it?" "My guys are already dealing with these cowboys on the street, and will be back soon. I think you and Gloria will die together." I killed him, shaking. I turned to Gloria and sat down on the bed next to her. "Oh, Mike," she make a sound, "I'm so sorry about all of this. I became stupid, selfish, and greedy, and thought I could have everything. Don't be sad about me, I deserve it. I deserve a divorce. I deserve to die. All I ask is that you forgive me, please." I thought about what she said and what that other man said. I realized he was right. If I did not accept her attempt at reconciliation, it would haunt me for the rest of my life. This was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. I looked at her and gathered my courage. After all, I once loved her more than anything in the world. Okay, Gloria, I said, I forgive you. Her face lit up for a moment as she tried to smile. Thank you, she said, tears in her eyes. And thank you for avenging me. Now I can die in peace. Can you just hold me? I'm so cold. I lay down on the bed next to her and hugged her, holding her close to me. She seemed so small, so cold in my arms. I love you, Mike. I've always loved you, she whispered. It didn't take long, less than a minute, to be honest, before I felt her tense up. I looked at her face and saw that her eyes were wide open, looking at something I couldn't see. Oh, wow, she said. For a moment, a strange light surrounded her, and when it disappeared, I knew it was all over. Her body was still there, but she was no longer there. Her eyes were wide open, her pupils fully dilated, and she had a small smile on her face. I laid her body on the bed, closed her eyelids with 2 fingers, and completely covered her. Goodbye, Gloria, I whispered, hoping she had found her peace. At that moment, I heard Amos calling me from the other end of the building. Amos. I called. I watched the file transfer happen. I thought it would take forever. I looked out the office window and saw Mike standing face to face with someone I couldn't see. His back was blocking my view. After a while, I saw him sit down on the bed next to his ex-wife. Finally, the transfer was completed. I sent a message to Danny with the address where the files were saved. I also sent her the password and hoped that was all she needed. I turned off the laptop and put it, along with the power adapter, in the saddlebags. I realized that everything was ending on the street as the shots gradually died down. I grabbed everything and ran to Ringo. As soon as I secured the saddlebags, I turned and shouted to Mike, Mike. Let's go. He turned and ran toward me. He was halfway to me when I saw the door open at the other end of the building. 4 of Carson's men, armed with machine guns, entered the building. Get down! I shouted. Mike's eyes widened, but he stood and fell to the floor. Come on, Mike. Move. I turned to Ringo and saw Wild Bill looking at me with a surprised expression on his face. Damn, he said. I've never seen anyone do that with a rifle. Did your grandfather teach you how to shoot with it? Yes, sir, Mr. Hickok. He taught me, I said. He smiled and extended his hand to me. That was a great shot, partner, he said. I smiled and shook his hand, knowing that I had just earned the respect of one of the most famous lawmen of the Wild West. He turned and walked toward the exit, clapping Elijah on the shoulder. Elijah looked at me with a smile. Well done, son, he said. Did you get everything you need? Yes, Grandpa, I said. You know I taught you how to shoot that rifle, but I never taught you how to do that spin trick. Where did you get that from? He asked. I saw it on a TV show a long time ago, I said. I've always wanted to try it myself. He nodded. TV show, huh? Well, just don't let it go to your head, son, he said. If you are too confident, you will become careless. Then you will meet someone faster or better, and it could end badly. Got it, I said. Still, you did great, son, he said. I'm proud of you, very proud. Thank you, Grandpa, I said. Ready to go? He asked. Yes, I said. I've already sent Danny everything she needs. Okay, he said, nodding his head. He turned to the others, who were now gathered at the end of the building. We better get on our horses and get home, boys. We mounted our horses again and headed back the way we had come. As before, a large hole opened up in front of us, and we walked through it, ending up in familiar territory. I was riding ahead of the group with Elijah as we walked down the hill to my house. Danny saw us coming down and ran out of the house, jumping into my arms as I got off Ringo. Thank God you're okay, she said, crying, hugging me tightly and kissing me. Your guy did a great job, Wild Bill said as he walked by. I kissed Danny and stepped back, handing her the saddlebags containing the files and laptop. I hope this helps you, I said. Her eyes widened as she looked into the bags. Did you send this to your friend? I sent it, she said. It'll take a few days to sort through this, but she said it's enough to bury Acme. I hope they get going soon, I said. Look, honey, why don't you take care of the boys while I take care of Ringo? Okay, she said. I'm so proud of you, she added, kissing me again. They entered the house, tying their horses to the railing in front of it, and I led Ringo to his paddock. I calmed him down and entered the house holding the rifle in my hands. Well, guys, We have one more thing left for today, said Elijah. Is everyone ready? They all nodded. Elijah turned to Mike, who was still wearing the overalls we found him in. How are you holding up? He asked. Mike nodded his head. I'm fine, he said. It just takes time to digest it all. Would you like to shower and change before meeting with the council? I asked. He looked at me and nodded. If it's not too much trouble, he said. Okay, I said. Go upstairs. I think I have some things that will suit you. I followed him upstairs and looked through my closet. I found an old pair of jeans and a shirt that I thought would suit him, and I gave them to him to try on. They fit, although it wasn't his style, but they were clean. I gave him the opportunity to shower and change clothes. He joined us when he came back down. By that time, Danny had all his papers ready. Elijah motioned for us all to gather in the living room. He took out his lasso and twirled it over our heads. The next moment, we found ourselves in an elegant conference room in front of a table where senior executives were sitting. As soon as we appeared, the man in the center looked at us in surprise. What the hell is this? He asked angrily as the other leaders looked at us. Who are you? How did you get here? What kind of circus from the Wild West is this? Mike stepped forward and addressed the man. Mr. Green, he said, my name is Michael Bradley, and I have come to submit my resignation. Well, take it to HR, he said, and hurry up before I call security. He reached for the phone, but I stopped him by putting the barrel of my rifle against it. He looked at me in surprise. I don't think so, I said. You will answer for this, he said. This is all being recorded on video, and I will put you all behind bars. Not so fast, I said. Look at your watch. He looked and saw what we all saw. Time had stopped, at least in this room, just like your video surveillance. You see, we were never here, and you have no evidence to the contrary. You're crazy, he said. We all see you. How will this help you? Mr. Green, Danny asked, stepping forward, what will you tell the police? That a group of famous Western lawyers just showed up at your office out of nowhere and threatened you? You will be thrown into a mental hospital before you have time to utter those words. Who are you? Green asked. My name is Danny Williams, and I represent Mr. Bradley, she said. Here is his proposal. She placed a folder on the table in front of him. He opened it, read the contents, and laughed. This must be a joke, he said. I will never agree to this, $1 billion. It will never happen. That's $10 billion, tax-free, she said. This does not include all the costs and my fees, which are also included. He looked at the documents again and chuckled skeptically. And what will you do if I refuse? He asked, a smirk on his face. Well, then we'll see each other often in court, she said. This employment contract that you have for Mr. Bradley to sign is a false document. In fact, his entire work was a fabrication to turn his wife into your personal prostitute. We have documents, videos, photographs, everything that proves your involvement in this scheme. We have evidence of attempted murder, false imprisonment, torture, slavery, human trafficking, illegal substances, the list goes on. You held my client against his will for 2 months, tortured and starved him, just so you could use his wife. In fact, you violated virtually all of my client's civil rights. That doesn't even include the destruction of his marriage and the wrongful death of his wife. I'm sure we can find many more victims. This contract alone is enough to trap you in the court system for 100 years, she said. And that doesn't include state and federal criminal charges, she added. Just imagine the reputation Acme will have when all this hits the media. Hearing this, Green's face turned white. Look, I can't approve this alone, he said. We need to discuss this and vote. The CEO needs to speak up. Green, Mike said, your company taught me well about financial control. You can approve it right now on your own, as president and chairman of the board. All you have to do is open your application, enter the code, and you're done. You don't need Carson for this. Speaking of Doug, said another man sitting at one end of the table, where is he? Where's my brother? Are you Doug Carson's brother? Mike asked. Yes. Why do you ask? He replied. You were Gloria's first boss. He nodded his head and stood up. Yes, he said. So you talked Doug into making it like this, Mike said. The man walked around the table and stood in front of Mike. Yes, he said. What are you going to do about it? I'll help you reunite with your brother, Mike said. The man's eyes widened, and he tried to punch Mike. We were all shocked by what we saw. This is for Gloria, Mike said. Before the man's body glowed red and then disappeared. You just killed this man in cold blood, Green said. Mike looked at him, full of hatred. It was self-defense, Mike said. Isn't that how you all saw it? He asked, looking around at the others. Everyone nodded in agreement. Sounds like self-defense, Bat Masterson said. This guy hit you first, Green said, looking at us with anger. Elijah chuckled. And you answered, Elijah said. Suddenly, the room darkened, and the temperature dropped sharply. I noticed that Green and the rest of the council were looking behind us in horror. I turned around to see Elijah and the other lawyers seemingly enlarged, their faces were blurred, and their eyes glowed like the flames of a campfire. Surrounding them were huge, dark-winged creatures with fiery swords. After a few minutes, the room returned to normal, but the fear at the table was palpable. Okay, Green said, his face still pale with fear. I'll do it, but on one condition. Please, what is it? Asked Danny. What will we get in return if we agree? He asked. You'll all get to keep breathing, at least for a while, Wild Bill said, causing chuckles among us. Green looked at the other council members. Do it, said the woman sitting next to him. Just do it and get it over with. Green nodded and opened the app. He entered the amounts and all the necessary information, then entered his code. We watched as the transactions took place on his monitor. When they were all finished, he looked at us. Please, he said, just leave. Elijah swung his lasso, and the next moment we were back in my living room. Everything went smoothly, I said sarcastically. So, that's all? Mike asked. Elijah nodded his head. For now, yes, he said. Then everything depends on the feds. If they don't do their job, we may have to intervene. I think we're done for today. Just a minute, Danny said before they left. We all turned to her. I talked to my parents while you were in Albania. They said they would talk to the pastor of the old village church they go to about our wedding next Saturday. That's pretty fast, isn't it? I asked. Are you sure you want this? Yes, I want to get married as soon as possible, she said. I turned to Elijah. Grandfather, I said, look, I know this might seem weird, but would you do me the honor of being my best man? He looked at me, stunned. Isn't that what you should ask your best friend or something? He asked. Yes, it is, I said. His eyes widened as he thought about it. Why not? He said. It would be an honor for me. Do you mind if I invite a few guests? He asked, pointing to the others. I'll be offended if you don't, I said. I saw the other men smiling. Elijah nodded. Okay, if that's what you want, son, I'll do it, he said. This will be a little hard to explain to your parents. Really? Probably not as difficult as you think, I said. Okay, I'll see you in a week on Saturday, he said. We shook hands, and they left the house. I turned to Mike. You're invited too, I said, if you want to come. Thank you, he said. I'll see how I feel. I'm very hungry now. Of course, I said. Stay overnight, and I'll take you home in the morning if you want. That night, we ate the leftover meatloaf I had in the fridge, and I set Mike up in one of the spare bedrooms. Danny and I talked for a while in the bedroom before going to bed. Why such a rush? I asked. I'm not complaining, I'm just curious, I added. I realize that life is too short and too precious to waste, and I want to start my new life with you, she said. Besides, I also have a feeling that you might spend more time with your grandfather, and I'm afraid that one day you might leave and never come back. I hugged her and calmed her down. I will always be there for you, I said. You and the child are the most important things in my life. Never forget this. I love you, she said, kissing me. I love you more, I replied. The next day, I took Mike home. It seemed Amy had returned his car to his home, and strangely, the bills were still being paid while he was in captivity. He thanked me for everything and went to his house. I saw that he was lonely and heartbroken, and I made a mental note to keep an eye on him. I also asked Danny about the amount she received from Mike. Is this deal really going to hold? I asked. She nodded. Oh yes, she said. The amount is a little higher than you might expect, but it will hold up if it is ever challenged, especially in such circumstances. Trust me. So how much did you get? I asked. Only about $3 billion, she said. What? I exclaimed. Did you get $3 billion from them? Yes, she said. There will be no tax. Why so many? I asked. Well, it might come in handy if I become the housewife I want, she said. The wedding went as planned, and we all had a great time. Danny looked gorgeous in her wedding dress, and I could see the pride on her father's face as he walked her down the aisle. Grandfather Elijah appeared, dressed in a modern tuxedo just like mine. I almost didn't recognize him. There was a woman with him, an elegant, slender blonde wearing a long dress and a hat with a veil that hid most of her face. The rest of the group also came, all of them dressed in modern clothes. I could tell they felt awkward in their costumes, but they seemed to enjoy interacting with the guests. The test came when I introduced Elijah to their parents. I introduced him as a justice of the peace and not under his real name, that's what he insisted. He acted as if he had never met them before, but I noticed that my mother saw something familiar in his face. She was the family historian and spent a lot of time reading Grandmother Elizabeth's diaries. She caught me during the reception. This man looks very familiar, she said. I think I've seen him somewhere before. Just a coincidence, I'm sure, I told her. She didn't say anything else, but I enjoyed watching her dance with the group. One day, I will tell her that she danced with some of the most famous lawmen in American history, but not today. Danny's parents had a great time too. A couple of hours into the reception, Elijah pulled Danny and me aside. We don't have much time left, but I want to introduce you to someone, he said. His companion approached and lifted the veil from her face. There she was, Grandma Elizabeth. She looked young, about Danny's age, and had long, wavy blonde hair that framed an angelic, smiling face. Amos, meet your grandmother, Elizabeth said. I was shocked and stunned by her beauty. She smiled and extended her graceful hand to me. I politely shook her hand and introduced her to Danny. Her face lit up when she saw the engagement ring. I can't believe I'm meeting you, Danny said. I always wondered if you would approve of me wearing your ring. Of course, dear, said Lizzie. I can't imagine anyone more deserving. I know you will be a wonderful wife to Amos and a great mother to your children. She turned to me. Amos, I want you to know that I'm very proud of you, and I love you both. I read your diary, I said. I feel like I've known you all my life. She smiled and gently touched my cheek. I'm glad, Amos, she said. You're more like your grandfather than you think. Maybe one day Danny will add her own chapter to this diary. Just know that we are always here for you. Thank you, Grandma, I said. I love you, I added, hugging her. She hugged me back, and I felt her warmth. It was strange, but there was an unusual warmth emanating from her that was also very calming. Of course, I said. I'll tell him. We have to go, dear, said Elijah. She nodded and kissed Danny and me on the cheek. Remember, she said, we are always with you. I'll be in touch, son, Elijah said. He turned to Danny and kissed her on the cheek. Welcome to the family, he added. He turned to his group and gestured upward. They nodded their heads and followed Elijah and Elizabeth to the exit. I followed them a few seconds later, but they had already disappeared. I turned around and almost collided with my mother. Where have these charming people gone? She asked. I could see that she was a little tipsy. They had to go, I said. They had a meeting they had to attend. Oh, she said. I promised one of them another dance. I smiled to myself. I passed a note to Mike, and I thought he almost fainted when he saw it. Everything is fine? I asked. Yes, he said. That's her handwriting. What is this? I asked. The address and phone number of an old girlfriend I dated before Gloria and I got married, he said. It's a good thing, isn't it? I asked. He smiled, looking at me. Yes, he said. Very good. I thought I had lost this number. Thank you. Please, I said. Danny and I enjoyed our honeymoon in Hawaii and returned home. Her parents looked after Ringo while we were away. I didn't know who was happier when we got back, Ringo or me. I started working on one of the bedrooms, getting it ready for the new baby. 9 months after Danny and I made love by the pond, she gave birth to a strong boy named William Elijah Jones. Her parents were ecstatic, as were mine. Somewhere in the distance, I knew my grandfather was smiling. It's been almost a year since the deal, but the feds are finally taking on Acme. The picture the news painted was gruesome: crime, intim, illegal substances, and illegal weapons. Every member of the council was arrested, along with most of the senior leaders. After months of legal battles, they all received life sentences, some of them even committed suicide. The company itself was split up and sold to other interests. Something told me that their story was not over yet. Mike and I continued to keep in touch after our wedding. Eventually, he reunited with his old girlfriend, and they planned to get married. She seems to like the new Mike, and I've never seen a happier person, except in the mirror. What do you think of our story today? I think it was quite interesting, but I feel sorry for my husband who came home after a business trip and saw a strange car outside their house. What was your impression at that moment? Write in the comments. See you later.